On the show today, we have guest James Nottingham. Engaging, thought provoking, and industry defining are just some of the words used to describe James Nottingham and his stellar contribution to the world of education. As a best selling author of 12 books and famed creator of The Learning Pit, a work that has been referenced over 200 million times, he has played a significant role in strengthening learning for students around the world. His latest book, Teach Brilliantly, brings together the best advice from his 30-plus years working in education as a teacher, leader, and consultant. Get ready for a great episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. James, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
It's an absolute delight to join you. Thank you for the invitation.
I'm really, really thrilled about your book. So I have it here, Teach Brilliantly. It's so good. I think knowing that, that's kind of the context for our conversation today. Is there anything you want listeners to kind of know about the book in general or about your work, yourself, as we jump into our conversation today?
It's my 12th book. My first book was called Challenging Learning, and I published that in 2010. And back then, it was a collection of the key ideas that I'd come across as a teacher that helped me to get the most learning with my most out of my students, the best progress for my students. And so I shared those ideas back then. After that, I took one topic per book and went deeply into it. So, for example, feedback or growth mindset, or the learning pit, which is a model that I created. I took one theme and went deeply. Then this 12th book is in effect full circle and back to, okay, if I had an elevator moment, now it's a very, very, very long elevator, if you're going to cover everything that I've covered in the book, but it's if you want to know what will make a dramatic difference to students' learning with little tweaks, not wholesale change, not huge, great, big projects, but just small little tweaks that I can put into practice, that you can put into practice the very next time we're in the classroom with our students, then that's what it's all about. And I've spent 30 something years in teaching. I still teach to this day. I work with researchers such as Carol Dweck, such as John Hattie. I've spent a lot of time with both of those on tour for many years. So I look at research, I look at practice. I'm always focused on, okay, yes, but how does this translate into our teaching practice, into our classrooms? And one of the things I do a lot is demonstration lessons. Give me any students, any class of kids. So long as they're happy to speak English with me, then I'll work with them. And I'll demonstrate any of these techniques working and with your students, and then we can talk about it afterwards. So that's my focus really, is how do we tweak things a little bit such that it has a big impact on our student learning.
That blend of researcher and practitioner is so present in the book. The distillation of all of the meta-analyses, all of the research, it is so beautifully written about. And also you don't ever feel like, as a reader, I never felt that you weren't in it, that you weren't in front of classrooms all the time thinking about the practicalities, and it just comes through so beautifully. So I really appreciate that, because sometimes we lean really far into one or the other, and it was a beautiful blend. So thank you.
No, well, thank you for saying that. Actually, when one of my books was the first one to be translated into Norwegian, I do a lot of work in Scandinavia, and they really struggled to place it because they said, we have the academic research books and we have the practical, nice little planning books, but we don't have this thing in the middle. And they struggled to find the voice with it. And they went for the third person in the end. And I said, no, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for me. This is me talking to my colleagues. And albeit I might not have met these colleagues, we're all colleagues in the teaching profession, and that's what I want it to be. And this is what I've learned by hanging out with researchers, and this is what I've learned by hanging out in the classroom for that long. And here you go, dear colleague. This is what I found out.
Yeah, I absolutely loved that tone. I felt like I was in there with you. I think taking kind of a big step back from the book and just thinking broadly across your years of experience, I like to ask about freedom dreaming. So Dr. Bettina Love talks about this as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. And so I'm curious, what is that big dream that you hold for the field of education?
Let's start with a small question, shall we? Goodness me. Right, in there, what's the meaning of life? Well, here we go. Yeah, okay. So, can I just have another sip of coffee? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, I think I do feel as if I'm on a bit of a mission. I hated school myself as a student. Um, you probably tell from my accent, I'm from the UK, and we have a system of primary and secondary, or primary and high school, and we switch at the age of 11. And so I went from a small little primary school with a couple of hundred students to me, it was a big high school with a couple of thousand students. I know if you're listening from Texas, you just think that's a tiny little thing, but 2,000 to me was a lot. And 2 months after I started high school, my mother died, and then my father was sent off to the Falklands War, which was a bit of a skirmish between the UK and Argentina at the time. And so my sister was farmed off to some neighbours, and I was home alone. And funnily enough, I acted up at school. Um, I suppose pop psychology would be I was looking for a bit of attention, you know? And as so often happens, my peer group labeled me the class clown, and my teachers labeled me as naughty. And I kind of lived to both of those labels and played up to them. And I got expelled from one of the high schools actually and I went to another one. And so it got worse and worse and worse. And the very best day of my childhood was the day I left school. So I didn't think for a moment that I would ever want to go back. But I didn't have any qualifications, so I ended up going into pig farming. Turns out that's quite a hard job, and, and I'm not cut out for that. And then I went into a chemical factory. That was even worse. And then a friend of mine said he was going to Cape Town to do some work in some of the squatter camps outside of Cape Town. And this was the sort of the very, very end of apartheid. It was 1989. And in fact, we were outside Victor Verster prison in February 1990 when Nelson Mandela was released. So it was quite a time of it. And when we were there, we did lots and lots of different voluntary jobs, and one was in a school. And I found my place. That I thought this is amazing. I want to be there. I want to work with kids. And when I got back to the UK, I got a job as a teaching assistant in a school for deaf children and loved it and thought that's what I'd be doing forevermore. But then it was every head of faculty was a Catholic nun. I think they probably saw the 666 on the back of my head, and they said, "Look, James, you should really leave." Oh, thanks very much. I thought I was doing a good job. And they said, "Well, you are, but we think you should be a teacher." And so I went into teaching with that sense that teaching education does work for many. Problem is, it doesn't work for all. When I think about my friends, a lot of them did well at school and they had the same teachers and they were in the same schools. So why did it work for them and it didn't work for me? And so I realized that if we started with a clean slate, we would build something very different these days for education than exists today. But I'm not so pessimistic as to think that this is entirely broken and therefore what can we do and what's the point? It's like trying to put up a tent in a hurricane, why bother? Well, actually, it does work very well for a lot of students. Problem is, it doesn't work for all. And so my focus is, how do we, as I say, tweak things a little bit to make a significant difference to all of our students? And we were talking before we started recording about that idea of equity. And one of the things that I found when going through the meta-analyses again and again and again, I see this message that this works for all students, and particularly for vulnerable students, for bilingual students or at-risk students or those who come from poverty. And so I'm thinking, so these are the things that there are things we can do. Now, of course, there's a lot of things outside of our power that we can't do. But as a teacher, we have got a tremendous influence on young people, and we ought to use that for good. And I believe that there are things we can do that will make a difference, and that's what I've been pursuing. That's my point, really. Let's make it a better educational experience than the one. I mean, I don't want to put it on a website, make it better than it was for James Nottingham. No, it's just let's make it better for as many students as we possibly can.
I love that. Thank you for all of the context and sharing your life story and your goal. I'm really, really grateful to you for your vulnerability, both in the book and on here in sharing your story. Because I think, as you said in the book, stories are what we remember and we connect to. And so when we're teaching, remember that. But this is also kind of an illumination of that principle. It's just like people, listeners, and folks who are engaging with the episode will engage. So thank you for that. And let's dive into some pieces of that book. So I love that you start with engagement as one of the first kind of meaty chapters, and you think about kind of this idea of exploratory talk was really, really interesting to me. So I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about, engagement, but specifically even the exploratory talk. What is it? What is it different from? And then maybe we can get into some of like the strategies for thinking in that chapter, which I really got excited about.
So engagement, I think often we talk about engagement that students aren't engaged. They're not as engaged as they used to be. And I think that is probably correct, albeit every generation, I think, complains about the next generation. And we've all done it, and our parents complained about it, and our grandparents, and so on, so on, so on. I'm sure everybody's always complained about the youth of today. But I do think it's right that we are facing a student body who have so many more distractions than they ever had before. And how on earth do we engage them? I worry that engagement is often sort of morphed into behavior. How do we get them to behave? And of course, we need them to behave, but I think that's a different category altogether, because engagement is whatever you are thinking about. So those of you listening to this podcast, if your mind has drifted, then you're no longer engaged. If you're thinking, where am I driving, or what am I having for tea tonight, or you all of a sudden you're not engaged. Lindsay, you mentioned that you're a voracious reader. Let's say you sit in a cafe and you're reading. Everybody around you, if they glanced over at you, they would assume that you were engaged in that book. But let's say, as you are reading, your mind drifts. Someone says something else. You give the impression of engaging, but actually you're engaged in something entirely different. And so my premise is engagement is thinking. Now, I also have strategies for helping kids to behave. But if we're talking engagement, engagement is thinking. Then that leads to the next bit. How are we better able to engage students' thinking? And that's through number one strategy, of course, is questioning. And as you'll have seen, I went into questioning quite a lot because we use questioning all the time. And early estimates had it at between 300 and 400 questions per day. More recent ones are between 100 and 350 per day. But it's still a lot of questions we're asking every single day. I mean, no wonder we go home and say, "Don't talk to me." And the problem is, the questioning style that we tend to use is initiate, respond, evaluate. That is, I ask a question, that's initiate. I give a nod, I give a gesture, I ask a question, that's initiate. Responses, students give something back. And that's fine, but the last bit evaluate, that's where it goes wrong, because we typically say very good, well done, or no, that's not right. And since students work out very quickly, okay, there's going to be public evaluation here, it tends to reduce engagement to 1/3, because students start to think, only say something if you know you've got the right answer. Now, of course, if you're talking kindergarten, they're all just shouting out anyway, But I'm talking about the older kids. The older they get, the more judicious they are in their decision making, and the more likely they are to think, now, have I absolutely got it right? Is it even if I have got it right, is it the right thing to say, because people might make fun of me? This culture in this classroom is not conducive to being willing, and so on. So there's all that sort of stuff going on in their head. And so the evaluative approach, even as simple as, yes, very good, well done, leads us to lose engagement of students. It actually reduces it to 1/3. And here's one of those, an example of a tweak. If we change it from evaluation to exploration, then the evidence is that lifts it to 2/3. Now, it's still not perfect, but I have yet to come across a perfect pedagogical strategy. But 2/3, of course, you think, all right, there's a good starting point for me. And exploration means I don't evaluate publicly. Now, privately, I'm still thinking, where in the hell did you get that idea from? Basically saying that, but I'm not giving anything away. I'm just, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? And I piece that together with mini whiteboards. I mean, that's a strategy that you'll have seen come very strongly through the book, that I honestly, truly haven't come across a piece of equipment in a classroom that makes as big a difference as a mini whiteboard. Because if I go for hands up, I might get, let's say, 1/3 of the kids volunteering. Maybe, maybe half, if I'm really, really, really lucky. If I go for cold calling, okay, you at the back, you at the front, okay, then I get different kids. But if I go for mini whiteboards and use the language to go with it, and it needs to be exploratory, what do you think it might be? Put down one or two of your ideas, share with your neighbor, and then together put down a thought. Work this out on your whiteboards, and when you're ready, show me. And that tends to get way, way, way more responses. And now what I can do, I can look around, and I'm privately evaluating, because I'm thinking, okay, yeah, most of them have got this. A few haven't. I wonder why those few haven't. Is it that they are rabbits in the headlights? Is it because they weren't listening? Is it because they were just all over? Or is it that they actually really don't know? So I need to maybe ask another question to check it out. So I'm doing lots of evaluation, but it's not public. I'm not saying, yes, very good, those of you got that right, well done. I'm using that information to think, what do I explore here? And if I notice lots of them have got it wrong or slightly off task, then I'll ask a subsequent question that will be designed to get them back on track. If most of them have got it right, I need to ask questions that will find out their reasoning for that, because it might be they just got lucky. It might be that they saw it on the wall. It might be that they've just been told it by a different teacher. I want to know, is it that, or is it that they knew it because they'd thought about it, because they'd reasoned it? And so the exploratory approach is very, very much more productive. It leads to much better gains. And I saw this in the research, and I thought, well, let me try it in practice. And honestly, I just think it's transformed my teaching practice. It really, really has. I mean, to start with, the kids were like, well, why isn't he telling us well done? What's wrong with him? Why is he grumpy today? And I had to say, listen, when I don't respond, it's not because I'm not interested. It's because I'm thinking about it and wondering and seeing what else we can ask to find out more. So that's exploratory in terms of questioning. And then there's exploratory in terms of dialogue. And one of the things that I like to do with a new group of students is when you get them into groups, and we typically do get them into groups at different times. Problem is, most kids haven't learned how to collaborate very effectively. And so I will give them a task to do. And partway through the task, most often they've kind of rushed to get it done. And I'll pause them and I say, now, if you have finished or pretty much finished, I'm sorry to say you've probably been using cumulative talk. And what I mean by cumulative talk is somebody says something and somebody else says, oh, yes, very good. That's nice. And then somebody adds to it. And it's all very lovely and it's all very friendly, but it doesn't lead to much critical thinking. And I want you to engage in critical thinking. Now, of course, if I'm working with younger students, I adapt the language a bit. I might say something like, it's not your job to agree with each other. Now, that's not to say I want you to have a fight or an argument, but it is your job to help each other to think more. And by that, I mean, I want you to use phrases such as, ah, yes, but what about? Or could it be? Or could you give me an example of that? Or I was wondering about. So it's not dismissing their ideas. And you're certainly going to continue to be respectful and a good listener, but your response ought to be exploring their ideas rather than simply agreeing with their ideas. It's a little bit like Goldilocks porridge. There's porridge that's just a little bit too warm, and that's cumulative. It's just very, very nice, but there's not a lot of thinking. It's just about being nice and getting the job done. Then there's porridge that's just a little bit too cold. That's disputational, and that's ego driven, and it's point scoring and who can be the wittiest or the cleverest. And then there's porridge that's just right, and that's exploratory talk. And again, the research bears this out. And so I thought, okay, let me try it. And I've been developing it more and more and more with my students. And goodness me, what a difference it makes in terms of the depth of their thinking. Now, we have to also be willing for some groups not to finish, quote unquote, because all too often in lessons, as we well know, it's about industry, it's about getting the job done. And if I might bounce for my final response to that question is a bounce to the difference between setting high expectations and setting low expectations. A classic symptom of low expectations is make sure you finish your work. Whereas a classic symptom of high expectations is make sure you understand this. That's a big difference, isn't it? Now, of course, in the high expectations, they're still going to be doing things, but the emphasis is on, am I remembering it? Am I understanding it? Am I connecting in it? What questions do I have? Whereas with low expectations is, have I finished?
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode. It's a collection of graphics that you can use to create your very own learning pit. Be sure to find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/233. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I love the almost like permission that you're granting to students when you're like, yeah, no, agreeing is actually not super helpful to anyone. Your job
Mm.
is to ask questions and to push your thinking and to think more. I think as a student, I am definitely like a people pleaser, I think. And it would have been so nice for a teacher to be like, no, actually, that's not your job. I am a rule follower. So I would have listened to that, right? And been like,
Okay. All
okay,
right.
like,
Okay.
okay, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to push back. I think a lot of students, particularly the students who succeed in traditional school, like just try to like, okay, check, done. You're right. Like you said, low expectations actually to just finish the work. And it's such a push to be like, no, I want you to explore that more. And so many
Yes.
people are unfamiliar with it. That I mean, I was a former high school teacher that you've done school this particular way for so long to kind of unlearn takes some time, but how worth it would it be to do that? That was
Yes.
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a demonstration lesson south side of Chicago. It would be less than 2 years after COVID began because we're all still wearing masks. And you probably have no problem understanding the accent, but I'm thinking, what on earth are these kids saying? And they had masks on as well. And I'm like, blinking out this. And it was a grade 9 class. And I was getting them doing some collaborative work. And I'm thinking, do I just let them get on with it and then pretend that I understand what they're saying when I don't? But anyway, there was that classic thing of a few groups just kind of got it done. And even more classic was that it was typically one kid did it and the other two, three, four kids just kind of went along with it. And so I introduced what I've just shared with you, and I use those three terms as cumulative, there's disputational, and there's exploratory, and I linked it to Goldilocks porridge and so on. And they were like, and they were nodding. Well, I think they were nodding, maybe not nodding off, but they seemed like they're interested. And I said, right, have another go, and this time be more exploratory. And it was funny because one of the guys, who was obviously a very dominant character in the class generally, and he was definitely leading his group. He says, "Well, I think we've all been very cumulative, haven't we?" And of course, they all agreed with him in a cumulative way. And he says, "Let's be more exploratory." But, and I thought, isn't he just like being sarcastic here? But actually, he was being genuine in it. And it really did lead to, because he says, right, I'm going to stop now. What do you think? Come back at me. Right, what questions do we have for her? What questions could we ask of him? And that, I thought, isn't that fascinating? And it was just a 40-minute lesson. And that pivot that was so noticeable. Yeah, it was lovely.
That's brilliant. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that because I can envision that in many of the classes that I taught. If
Yeah,
I had just had the language, they'd be like, oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and I love the strategies. I'm looking at my notes here. You have so many, and folks should get the book and truly explore them. But the kind of like the sense of ranking, like the inner researcher in me is like thinking of like a Q sort or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, that would be so cool to do a ranking activity or like the I think it was a concept line or the odd one out, and like just ways to engage with ideas that
Yeah.
illuminate the thinking more than the typical like yeah I'm gonna just ask some questions or I'm gonna like there's so many creative ways and I love the question section but beyond even just asking the verbal question is like here's some stuff, here's some concepts, here's some terms, like play with that, explore that. It's really cool and totally would rework I think how a lot of teachers plan their lessons in a positive way.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots and lots of strategies that I've come across. So there's one or two in the book that I've invented, so to speak, but most of them are just brilliant practical strategies that I've come across in teaching in different countries. And you mentioned ranking. I mean, it's just a lovely, lovely, lovely strategy, Um, a good example, I was working with a district in Wyoming a few months ago. And I mean, I work a lot in Australia, and I thought Australia had some remote areas. This place in Wyoming, it took 4 hours to drive in a straight line from Salt Lake City. And for the last 3 hours, there was no mobile phone reception at all. And I passed like three cars in 3 hours, and there was just cows everywhere. It was just like, where on earth am I? Anyway, I got there and I did this ranking thing. I said, right, okay, in groups, could you get a piece of paper, rip it up into 9 little slips? On each slip of paper, will you write a job or a profession? And they did that. And I said, now rank them. And they did the classic thing that students do, kind of, well, you can't rank them. But many groups said, yeah, fine, let's get on with it. And they ranked them, and of course, being in Wyoming, it was like the life or death, who do you rely on for life? And of course, guess what? Cowboy was at number one, and teacher was at the bottom. But anyway, there was and I said, okay, and I only gave them a few minutes and then I paused them and I did what I mentioned a few moments ago that, okay, if you have managed to rank them, I would gently suggest you've been involved in cumulative talk, which means that now I want you to get into exploratory talk. And the energy in the room changed so much, and they started questioning and challenging each other. And so then you do that with children. So let's say in an elementary classroom, You get them to think of some characters in a book that they've been reading. I mean, if we stick with the Goldilocks porridge for a minute, you have the three bears and Goldilocks. There's four, and how do you rank them? But you don't tell them how to. Say, I want you to rank them. And they're like, well, how? And I say, well, that's a good question. And they're like, uh, yeah, but can you answer it then? I said, no, I want you to think about it. Have a think. What are some of the ways in which you could rank them? Older students might be, could still stick with literature for a minute and take Shakespearean characters and rank them. But you don't tell them the criteria for ranking them because you want them to think about that as well. So it's this permission to think. I think that's what the purpose is.
Totally. Yeah, it's awesome. I love how these illuminate too. Their last story just really illuminates how multiple strategies and approaches can be kind of combined. They're like very cumulative, right? You create this class culture, now you could do this thing.
Absolutely.
Now we introduce the idea of exploratory. It's so great. I think I'm looking at time like, wow, the time has gone by very fast. But I would love to get into this concept of challenge. I mean, you've done so much. The learning pit is
Yeah.
classic, right, in education. So I wonder if you can kind of talk us through kind of that culture of challenge and the learning pit model, if you don't mind, just so we can kind of think about how that plays into the culture that these discussions are happening in, ideally.
Sure. Yeah. I created the Learning Pit in the mid-90s, and it's probably worth me sharing with you how I introduce it to a new group of students. And these are the sorts of messages that I give them. I'm sorry to say that success is not straightforward. I wish it was, but it's not. If it were straightforward, every single one of us would be as successful as we want to be. I would be multilingual, for example. I'd be able to play the guitar like Jimi Hendrix. I can't do any of those. Reason is because to become really, really successful, it takes time, it takes effort, determination, it takes good strategy or strategies, it takes some brilliant teaching, it takes a bit of luck. There's all sorts of things that contribute towards becoming more successful. What we do know is the first step, always, 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 the first step in becoming more successful is to step out of your comfort zone. There's no choice about it. Because if you stay in your comfort zone, well, it's nice. It's a nice place to be. I mean, there's a bit of giveaway in the name, comfort zone. I like it. But to become more successful, I necessarily have to go beyond where I am right now. And so then when I step out of my comfort zone, I'm going to encounter a performance dip. That's what psychologists for decades have called it, a performance dip. And then I do this with students, and it's a good way to illustrate it with students. And that is, could you all pick up a pen and will you write out your full name? Now, will you put your pen in your other hand and write out your full name again? And of course, there's always a bit of laughter about that and so on. And now, show the person next to you your two attempts and hope that they don't laugh at them too much. Did you notice your second attempt looks worse than your first? And that's a performance dip because you've gone from what was comfortable, writing with your dominant hand, to what was uncomfortable, writing with your weaker hand. Did you also notice how much more effort it took, how awkward it felt? Those are the sensations associated with learning. And my job as a teacher is actually to create those sensations in the classroom. I don't want you to feel socially uncomfortable, emotionally uncomfortable. I don't want that. But intellectually, I want you to be uncomfortable. I want you to feel awkward. I want you to feel like you're putting in loads of effort and it's looking worse at the moment. And that's the key. It's not, it's looking worse, full stop. It's looking worse at the moment. And then this is when I draw out the learning pit. I say to them, typically people talk about success as you just need to keep taking steps towards where you want to get towards your goal. And so that sounds lovely, but more often than not, you take one or two steps and then you get worse before you get better. And I say this to the students. I says, I'm going to let you into a secret. When I ask teachers to do exactly what you've just done, write with your dominant hand and then you write with your weaker hand, their handwriting looks terrible. And then I ask them, how many of you are ambidextrous? How many of you can write equally well with both hands? And I promise you this, there's normally about one or two teachers in the room. That's it. All the others can't. And everyone who can't is a quitter. They quit. Now, that's not me making fun of them. It's me talking about what is human. We quit with so many things because you just can't do everything. And so what we do is we prioritize. And since we prioritize, what it means is we quit with lots of things. And you will find yourself in what I call the learning pit because I draw it out and it looks like it gets worse before it gets better. And when you find yourself in that learning pit, there are two main solutions. Number one is quit. Just think it's not worth it. Number two is work out how to get through it. Is it the strategy? Is it the approach? Is it the way you're collaborating? Is it a different question you need to ask? Is it a resource that you're missing? Is it some bit of information that you need? Is it that you need some advice from someone? But there are lots and lots and lots of ways to help you through the pit. And my job is to help you to get into the pit, but also to give you advice about things you can do to get out of the pit. And now let's get to the good news. The good news is if you are willing to work through the pit and out the other side, I promise you, you will feel so much more accomplished than if you'd given up. We all do that. All of us. We quit, it's quick. But if we persevere and go through and out the other side, we know that sensation of feeling so good about ourselves because we think, I figured it out. I did it. I persevered and I got here. And that's what makes it worthwhile. And then when you get out of the pit, you think to yourself, I figured it out. And since I figured it out this time, I bet you I can figure it out again and again and again and again. And incidentally, that notion of I can figure it out is self-efficacy, that belief that I can influence things. And so the idea of challenge is we have to create this sense in our classroom that challenge is a good thing in a learning situation. Now, challenge crossing the road is not a good thing, but challenge in the classroom is a good thing. And it's what helps us to grow. And we have to learn how to get through this pit and out the other side. And it's about, I think the final thing worth mentioning is it's about the purpose. The purpose is to improve. The next time you get on a flight, what would you think if the pilot says, well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is my maiden voyage. But listen, we all have to learn sometimes. So if you wouldn't mind, please buckle up. It's going to be somewhat of a bumpy ride. I suppose all of us would be like, can we get off, please? Because what we want is that pilot to have done so many thousands upon thousands upon thousands of training hours that she or he could land the plane upside down on the Hudson River. You know, we want them to be that expert, such that they find flying a plane easy. So when I'm on the plane with them, when they have got passengers, don't take risks. Just perform brilliantly. But please, 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 at pilot school and in your on professional learning, please, please, please go on those simulators, try lots of things, work it out. What if, what about, could we? And that's what schooling ought to be like. It's not performing, it's the learning phase. And so that we're ready to perform in exams or on the sports field or in the stage or playing in the band or something. You know, it's rehearsals ready for performance. And we really, really, really need our students to be much, much more willing to go for challenge in the learning situation, not the crossing the road situation, but the learning situation. That's the key to it. And what I worry about is there is a meta-analysis that I share in the book covering 42 studies that show when we give kids choice, they learn less. They learn less when given choice, not because choice is a bad thing, but because most kids, when given choice, pick the easier option, not because they're lazy, but because they think that's what we want them to do. Because they have noticed that when they get things right, we praise them and we say, very good, well done. And when we they don't get things right, we say, try harder. Well, what we want them to think is we encourage them to be out of their comfort zone, or what I call in the learning pit. And I need to adjust my praise for that. So if they find something straightforward and easy, I need to say, well, you find it really easy, let's make it more interesting. If they are struggling, that's when I need to give them loads of praise. You're doing brilliantly. I'm so impressed that you're keeping going with this. That look of determination. How about, and then you offer them a strategy or an idea. We've got to make challenge much, much, much more a common feature of the classroom.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm glad you brought up the choice piece around challenge because I'm all about
Mm.
my background is in student voice and I'm like, yeah, let's, co-create as much as possible. And that's exactly it. It's like it's not inherently bad. It is the choice that they're making is because of this culture of schooling that we've done. So I love the praise adjustment as the kind of a response to that. And I'm also looking at time, so I'll wrap up
Yeah.
here, but I want to just name the 80-20 split, I think was a really good one too that you named, right? It's like they can't be in challenge mode 100% of the time, right? It's about 20% that is
Mhm.
ideal.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah. Yeah.
80%
Yeah.
successful. So that was a new learning for me that I really appreciate.
Okay, good, 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 good.
And I
And
think, yeah.
it's the purpose. Where are we now? I don't want them to feel challenged in an exam hall or on the stage or in an interview. I want them to think this is my time to shine, to show what I'm capable of, to show what I've learned. But in the classroom, I want them to be out of their comfort zone. I want them to be exploring and wondering and making mistakes and then learning from those mistakes because that's the learning part. Ready for the performance, Let the pilots make all the mistakes in the world on the simulators and then perform brilliantly. That's what we're trying to do with our kids. And if the pilots are thinking, oh no, I just want to show you how brilliant I am at landing the plane on the simulator. Well, but what are they learning from that? And yet, when we see kids do things like that, so often we praise them and we say, very good, well done. I'm thinking, for goodness sake, if it's the learning situation, they need to be out of their comfort zone. If they're in the performance situation, then let's see what they're capable of.
Absolutely. I love your adjustment to putting up work as like don't put up the final product, put up like the butterfly example of like here is the stages of the drawing. Here is the
Yes,
progress that I made. It's such a bigger thing to celebrate that than like what did the final work look like, right?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, don't just put their final pieces of work on the wall. Also put the earlier iterations. Yeah.
Love that. All right, a final question from you. Well, final two mini kind of really fast ones. Lightning round. What's one thing you would encourage listeners to do when they end the episode? So we've talked about a ton of strategies. What might be like a good starter or like the most impactful thing to like do tomorrow?
Um, Goodness me, you start and finish biggest of questions. Um, uh, yeah, I mean anything that you've heard that interests you, that tickles your fancy, really, because we're all at different places in our career and all got different interests, and we're all teaching different age groups and different subjects. So it's really what do you suppose will make the biggest difference, A, to your teaching and therefore B, to the students' learning outcomes, which is why my this book, Teach Brilliantly, is it's quite an eclectic mix, although I think it hangs together very well, if I might say so. I mean, there's a very strong thread going through, but there's lots and lots and lots of things, and I don't anticipate that people will read it cover to cover. Yourself excluded from that. And say, I can't believe it that you read it cover to cover. But most of the time, it's about dip in and find, I'm interested in feedback, or that's interesting about challenge, or that exploratory talk, or that questioning, and just pick something that you think, yeah, I can imagine having a go at that, and then play with it, ready, play, refine.
I love it. And then finally, people are going to get the book. So I'm going to drop a link in the show notes in the blog post for this episode. But also, where do people connect with you? Where's a good place to follow your future work?
Best one is my website, learningpit.org, just as it sounds, learningpit.org. Yep. And I'm there, but teach brilliantly through Solution Tree, and they've got information about me on the Solution Tree website as well.
Excellent. James, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
It's been a delight, and thanks for those huge questions. I mean, typically I only answer those questions when I've got beer in my hand, but there we are. Thank you.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.